Hey guys, today's tutorial is going to be about drums, specifically trance drums. I've got a little project set up here which has been extracted from something else I'm working on, which is still not finished, surprise surprise, but it's pretty much as is. I haven't really edited it at all from the track, and the track's not finished, so it might not sound brilliant, but it should work for the tutorial. What I've got are separate elements, so I've got kick, hats, claps, and I've done some percussion as well, and also a few loops. I don't usually use 3 loops, all straight together. I often chop them up, use 1 or 2 maybe, just as a bit of padding. But in this case, I think they work fairly well, and for the tutorial it works well as well, because you can see how they are mixed together a little bit. First things first is a sidechain channel, which is just a short kick on silent, sent, post fader. So there's no audio at all on it. If I solo it, play it, nothing. It's just sending a signal to the compressors that I'm using for ducking, so forget that for now. The first channel I'll start with is the main kick, which is it's more for the bottom end, which I'll play you now, soloed. So fairly straightforward. I can't really hear what I'm doing on this. I'm on some really crap headphones so that I can record my voice, so I probably won't tweak the EQ too much. But what I've done here is low cut it for some reason, no idea why. I've compressed it and I've just EQ'd it to the way I thought it sounded good in the track. Not necessarily here, but in the track. That's what was working at the time. So you figure out what works best for you in the track you're working on. I've also layered in a click, which I don't always do. But I couldn't find a kick that was working well for me in this track, so I've gone for another layer which sounds like this, which is very subtle. I'll add it in as the kick's playing, the main kick. Now I can't hear that at all really on my headphones, but in the mix it does work. That's just to get some transient through the mix, and what it means is I can move the point at which it comes through the mix with all the other elements in as well. Next one is my closed hats, which I add groove to manually, which I always do. So if you've seen the rolling bassline tutorial, you should recognise this. First hat's straight, third one is, fifth one is, seventh one is, and then the second, fourth and sixth are moved off beat slightly, so you get a tick, 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 rather than straight hats. It's quite subtle. Next one will be an open hat, which is all fairly straightforward. Just choosing the right samples for the track, that's what I generally do. Hats I'll usually high pass up to about maybe 100 or 200 hertz, because there's nothing else going on down there. The open hat I've boosted a bit at the top end just to give it some extra sheen. And then coming down to the claps, I've used 2 claps I think in this case. Yeah. Okay, let's go into short circuit, which is what I usually use for my drums. You'll notice I've got a number of samples fired up, and they're all mapped to the keyboard, so I can play them and move the MIDI notes up and down as the track's playing, so I can audition each one. So in this case, I'm using those ones. So there's a short one here, which is panned slightly to the right, and a slightly longer one which stays central. You can see the panning over here. And what that gives me is the long one is more for the ambience and the atmosphere. I may even pan that left a bit further on down the mix, I don't know yet. And the short one is what comes through the mix. It's like the crunch or the hit. So if we put all those together, you've heard that a million times before. The next thing I've done is added some percussion, which I'm doing a little bit of experimentation with at the moment. And if I open up short circuit again, ignore that one, I didn't use that one. and that's another version of this one down here. Now what I've done is I've found some unusual, interesting sounds, and what I've also done is I've tuned them to the track. Now there's no bass line, there's no synths in this version, this is just the drums, but these are tuned to the key that the track's in. So this one, down 3 semitones. This one I haven't because it just happened to be in key. That one up 2 semitones. Okay. The first one is panned to the right. That one. So is the second one. This last one is panned to the left a bit. It might not sound as though it's panned that much because you've got the ping pong delay and the reverb on it as well, which kind of brings it back into the centre a bit, but they are panned. And if I play that, it's quite interesting because the delays also add more hits, which give it a bit more groove. If I go into the channel here, I've EQ'd it. I'll come back to that in a second. I've EQ'd it, I've low cut it, I've taken a little bit out around 500 Hz because it was a little bit boomy down there, and I've taken a bit of the top end off because I've also got hats and loops in there as well, so I don't want it all trying to compete for the same space. If I turn these effects off, it's quite tedious dry. So I've added some delay, which helps it move around, and also a plate reverb. Plate reverbs and small reverbs work really well on percussion and some drums. You've got to be careful of the early reflections because it can start, I find it can start flamming a bit sometimes when you get a drum hit and then a delay hit straight away, or not a delay hit, a reverb hit straight away. It sounds a bit weird, so you might need to roll off the top end a bit to stop those early hits coming back. But the ambience itself, if you listen, it's quite nice. It also, another thing it helps is I put the loops through this same reverb, and it helps the percussion, the loops, and some of the other drums you put through that plate reverb sit together nicely. Because if you've got any room sound on the drum samples you're using, all of a sudden you've got drums all sounding different. One sounds like it's in a room over there, another one over here. So putting them all through the same reverb will help them sit together better. So that's that. This EQ I'm using here, which everybody should buy because it's dirt cheap and it's brilliant, IAQ Pro. You've got a mid-side function, and what that means is I've got an EQ for the middle frequencies, an EQ for the side frequencies, and I've done it a bit extreme here, but it just works. You might not always need to do this. So what I've done in the middle, which is this window up here, is rolled off the top end, because you don't need those top end frequencies sitting in the middle of the mix because you've got loads of other stuff going on there. And on the sides I've taken out the bottom end, not that there's any in there really, and I've boosted the side frequencies quite a lot at the top end. In fact, it's a huge amount. But if I switch it off and then switch it back on again, you may not notice a difference because it is subtle, but you should hear it slightly widen the sound. So let's try that again, and I'll switch it back on halfway through. Back off again. Back on again. So it is subtle, but it does work. So let's put all those together. Okay, so I quite like that. Now what I've done further on down the track, where I've got more melodic elements in, I take out this little farty sound. Because it does start to interfere with some of the other parts, because it is quite tonal, so I've just removed it later on, but just for showing you here it can stay in. Now let's go on to loops. First one is quite shuffly, I think. I've put some delay on it to get it moving around and boosted the top end. That's it. Okay, so that's nice and subtle. Next one I've done something similar, not quite such a boost at the top end and no delay. This one's panned to the left slightly as well, just to keep it away from this first one. Shuffly again. And the last one is a little bit more metallic, just a tiny boost, and I've panned this to the right a little bit. And what I'll tend to do is I'll tend to add maybe 5 or 10 loops in all. So I just knocked the microphone. And then just bring them in and out and play with them and see which one works with a track, because sometimes you get odd little hits in these mixes in these loops, and they just don't work. Now you can, move the start and end points of these loops and kind of customize them a bit, but for now I've just whacked them in as they were. So what I'll do is bring all the drums back in, and I'll just bring the loops in one by one. So that one's very, very subtle. So I mute the loop group. I personally believe that loops like that should just be barely audible. They're glue. They're like a little something else that goes on in the background to help the groove. I've also sent, I've also sent these loops to the same plate reverb as I did the percussion, so they're all kind of sitting in the same spot. Just a little bit, and then just boosted the top end of the entire group, which may or may not be necessary. It depends on what you've done by channel, but sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So that's it. Let's play it all again. In fact, what I'll do is this first one, I'll remove these tonal hits again, so you can compare what the entire mix sounds like with and without. That's it. Hope it was useful. I'll see you again soon. Cheers.